Everyone froze when 7-year-old Emma Sullivan walked straight past the bailiffs, past the attorneys, past every single adult in that Austin, Texas courtroom, and stopped directly in front of Judge William Crawford's bench. Her German Shepherd sergeant walked beside her, perfectly calm, perfectly focused, as if they had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times. The little girl in the wrinkled pink dress looked up at the most powerful man in the room, a man who had been confined to a wheelchair for 3 years, a man who held her father's fate in his hands, and she spoke words that made every single person stop breathing. "Free my daddy," she said, her small voice carrying through the stunned silence, "and me and Sergeant will heal you. We'll make you walk again." 3 heartbeats. Nobody moved. Nobody blinked. Nobody breathed. Then laughter exploded through the courtroom like thunder. The prosecutor nearly choked on his own smugness. Reporters in the back rows snickered and scribbled notes. Even the bailiffs, the men who were supposed to maintain order, couldn't hide their smirks. A 7-year-old girl promising to heal a paralyzed federal judge? It was absurd. It was ridiculous. It was the most impossible thing anyone had ever heard in a court of law. But what nobody in that room understood, what nobody could have possibly known, was that Emma Sullivan and her German Shepherd had already done the impossible before. And they were about to do it again. If this story touches your heart, if you want to see what happens next, take a moment right now to subscribe to this channel and tap that notification bell so you never miss an update. Drop a comment below telling me if you believe in miracles, and hit that like button to help more people discover Emma's incredible journey. Trust me, you are going to want to be here for what comes next. Now, let me take you back to the beginning. 6 months before that fateful day in court, Michael Sullivan was a free man. He was a respected physical therapist in Cedar Park, Texas, just outside Austin. He ran a small clinic that specialized in something most doctors dismissed as nonsense, something he called animal-assisted rehabilitation therapy. Michael believed with every fiber of his being that the bond between humans and animals could unlock healing that traditional medicine simply could not explain. His methods were unconventional. His results were undeniable. Patients who had been told they would never walk again took their first steps in Michael's clinic. Veterans suffering from severe post-traumatic stress disorder found peace working alongside therapy dogs. Children with developmental challenges made breakthroughs that specialists called miraculous. Word spread. His clinic grew. And Michael Sullivan became known as the man who could heal the unhealable. But not everyone celebrated his success. Dr. Harrison Vance was the chief administrator of Austin Memorial Hospital's prestigious rehabilitation center. He was a man accustomed to being the best, accustomed to having the most patients, accustomed to being the name everyone trusted. When Michael Sullivan's little clinic started pulling patients away from his multimillion-dollar facility, Harrison Vance felt something dark take root in his chest. Resentment, jealousy, rage. He watched his patient numbers decline month after month. He watched his reputation suffer. He watched everything he had built begin to crumble because of one man with unconventional ideas and a gift for healing. And then came the accusation that would destroy everything. 3 days before Christmas, police cars filled the driveway of the Sullivan family home. Emma watched from her bedroom window as officers in dark uniforms approached the front door. She watched her father, the gentlest man she had ever known, placed in handcuffs while her mother collapsed against the doorframe, sobbing uncontrollably. She watched the man who had taught her to ride a bike, who had read her bedtime stories every single night, who had shown her that love could heal any wound, get pushed into the back of a police car like a common criminal. A former patient had come forward with accusations. Michael Sullivan, they claimed, had stolen prescription medications from the clinic. Evidence appeared seemingly out of nowhere. Bottles with his fingerprints. Security footage that seemed damning. Financial records showing suspicious transactions. The case against him was airtight, or so everyone believed. Michael was arrested. He was denied bail. And the media, hungry for scandal, painted him as a monster. But Emma knew the truth. She knew her father was innocent. She knew someone had done this to him, someone powerful, someone who wanted him silenced. And she made a promise that cold December night, standing at her bedroom window with Sergeant pressed against her side. "I'll bring you home, Daddy," she whispered into the darkness. "Me and Sergeant. We'll bring you home." Now, you need to understand something about Emma Sullivan. She was not an ordinary 7-year-old girl. From the time she was 4 years old, Emma had known she was different. It started with an old Labrador named Biscuit, the family dog who had been with them since before Emma was born. Biscuit got sick. The veterinarian found a massive tumor and delivered the devastating news with sorrowful eyes. 2 weeks, she said. Maybe 3. There was nothing to be done. The family should make Biscuit comfortable and prepare to say goodbye. But Emma refused to accept it. Every single night, she slept beside Biscuit on the floor. She pressed her small hands against his side and whispered to him. She sang to him. She told him stories. And Sergeant, just a puppy then, a rescue dog that 3 shelters had labeled unadoptable because of his aggression, curled up with them both. Something happened during those long nights. Something nobody could explain. 3 weeks later, the Sullivan family returned to the veterinarian for what they believed would be a final goodbye. The vet ran her tests, expecting to confirm that the tumor had grown, expecting to discuss end-of-life options. Instead, she dropped her clipboard. The tumor was gone. Completely gone. She ran the tests 4 times. She called colleagues. She consulted specialists. There was no medical explanation. There was no scientific rationale. The tumor had simply vanished. But Emma knew. And Sergeant knew. They had discovered a gift, a connection, something that worked when they worked together. Over the next 3 years, Emma and Sergeant quietly helped 7 animals and 3 humans recover from conditions that doctors had called hopeless. Each time, they worked in secret. Each time, Michael watched in amazement, documenting everything but telling no one. He was protecting his daughter. He knew the world would not understand. He knew people would try to exploit her, turn her into a spectacle, destroy her childhood in pursuit of her gift. But now, with Michael facing 15 years in prison for crimes he did not commit, Emma was done hiding. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Every day, Emma sat in the front row of the gallery with her mother. Every day, she watched the prosecution present their fabricated evidence. Every day, she watched her father's hope fade a little more. The defense attorney did his best, but the evidence was overwhelming. Fingerprints, footage, financial records. Everything pointed to Michael Sullivan's guilt. By the final day of the trial, even Michael's own lawyer had lost hope. But Emma had been busy. Every night while her mother cried herself to sleep, Emma worked with Sergeant. She talked to him, showed him her father's old notebooks, told him about the bad man who had hurt their family. German Shepherds have remarkable tracking abilities. But Sergeant had something more. He had Emma. Together, they followed invisible threads. Scents. Intuitions. Feelings that led them to places logic never could. They led them to the hospital. To Harrison Vance's private office. To a loose board behind a bookshelf that Sergeant scratched at until it came free. Behind that board was a metal box. Inside that box was a letter. Emma could not read all the words, but she understood enough. This letter was proof. Proof that her father was innocent. Proof that Harrison Vance had framed him. And proof of something even darker, something that connected Vance to the accident that had paralyzed Judge William Crawford 3 years ago. The same judge who was now presiding over her father's trial. On the final day of the trial, as the attorneys made their closing arguments, Emma slipped away from her mother. She walked down the center aisle of the courtroom with Sergeant beside her. She walked past the bailiffs who were too surprised to stop her. She walked straight up to Judge Crawford's bench and made her impossible offer. "Free my daddy, and me and Sergeant will heal you. We'll make you walk again." The laughter that followed was deafening. The mockery was absolute. Even Judge Crawford's face turned red with anger as he demanded that someone remove this ridiculous child from his courtroom. But before the bailiffs could reach her, a voice cut through the chaos like a knife. "William, stop." The entire courtroom fell silent. A woman was standing in the gallery. A woman the judge had not seen in 3 years. A woman who, according to every doctor who had treated her, should have been dead 6 months ago. His sister Rebecca. She was supposed to have terminal cancer. She was supposed to be in a grave. But there she stood, healthy and whole, tears streaming down her face as she pointed at the 7-year-old girl with a German Shepherd. "That child saved my life, William," Rebecca said, her voice breaking with emotion. "6 months ago, doctors gave me 2 weeks to live. Emma Sullivan and her dog gave me my life back." The courtroom erupted in whispers and gasps. But Emma was not finished. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. The letter from Harrison Vance's hidden box. "There's more," she said quietly, her eyes locked on the judge. "The man who put my daddy in jail is the same man who put you in that wheelchair." Judge William Crawford's blood ran cold. His hands trembled as a bailiff handed him the letter. As he began to read, his face transformed. Confusion gave way to shock. Shock gave way to horror. And horror gave way to a rage so profound that everyone in the courtroom could feel it radiating from him like heat from a fire. The letter detailed everything. The planted evidence against Michael Sullivan. The paid witness who had made the false accusations. And the real reason Harrison Vance needed Michael Sullivan silenced forever. Because Michael had been getting close to the truth. The truth about a hit-and-run accident 3 years ago that killed a woman named Margaret Crawford, the judge's wife. The truth about who was really driving the black SUV that ran the red light. The truth about Harrison Vance. Judge Crawford looked up from the letter. His eyes found Emma's. And in that moment, everything changed. "Bailiff," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "lock down this courtroom. No one leaves. Contact the FBI. Contact the district attorney." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of 3 years of grief, 3 years of rage, 3 years of searching for answers that had finally arrived in the hands of a 7-year-old girl. "And issue an arrest warrant for Dr. Harrison Vance." The courtroom exploded into chaos. But Emma stood perfectly still, Sergeant pressed against her side, watching the judge with calm, knowing eyes. She had done what she promised. She had found the truth. But the question remained, hanging in the air like a storm cloud ready to burst. Could she keep her other promise? Could a 7-year-old girl and her German shepherd really make a paralyzed man walk again? And what would happen when Harrison Vance discovered that his carefully constructed world of lies was about to come crashing down? The answers were coming. And nothing would ever be the same. Everyone froze when Rebecca Crawford pulled down the collar of her blouse and revealed smooth, healthy skin where tumors had once spread like wildfire across her neck and chest. The courtroom fell into absolute silence as this woman who should have been dead and buried 6 months ago, pointed at the 7-year-old girl standing before the judge's bench and spoke words that shattered everything the skeptics believed. "I was supposed to die," Rebecca said, her voice trembling with emotion. "Every doctor at MD Anderson Cancer Center told me to make peace with my final days. They gave me 2 weeks. 2 weeks to say goodbye to everyone I loved. 2 weeks to write my will and plan my funeral. But this child, this little girl and her German shepherd, they gave me my life back when every single expert had given up." Gasps echoed through the courtroom like ripples across still water. Reporters furiously scribbled notes. The prosecutor's smug expression melted into confusion. And Judge William Crawford stared at his sister with eyes that held 3 years of pain, 3 years of guilt, 3 years of questions that had never been answered. What happened in the next few moments would change everything he believed about justice, about healing, and about the impossible promises of a 7-year-old girl. 6 months earlier, in a quiet hospice facility in Georgetown, Texas, Rebecca Crawford lay in a narrow bed waiting to die. The room smelled of antiseptic and flowers, that sickly sweet combination that everyone associates with endings. Tumors had spread from her lungs to her lymph nodes to her bones. They were visible beneath her skin now, dark shadows that mapped the territory her cancer had claimed. Doctors spoke in hushed tones outside her door. They used words like comfortable and peaceful and managing pain. Nobody used words like hope or recovery or future. Those words had been stripped from Rebecca's vocabulary the moment the oncologist showed her the final scans. 2 weeks, maybe less. She had already written her will. She had already recorded video messages for her nieces and nephews. She had already picked out the dress she wanted to be buried in, a blue one that matched her eyes, the same eyes her brother William had. William. Her brother. The federal judge who had survived the accident that killed his wife Margaret 3 years ago. The brother she blamed for living when Margaret died. The brother she had not spoken to since the funeral, when grief and rage had made her say terrible things she could never take back. Rebecca Crawford was prepared to die angry. She was prepared to leave this world with hatred in her heart and unforgiveness on her lips. Until a little girl and a German shepherd appeared at her door. Emma Sullivan walked into that hospice room like she belonged there, like she had been invited, like dying patients received visits from 7-year-old strangers every single day. Her German shepherd sergeant walked beside her, calm and focused, his intelligent brown eyes scanning the room before settling on the woman in the bed. Rebecca tried to call for a nurse. She tried to demand that someone remove this child from her room. But something stopped her. Something in the way Emma looked at her, something ancient and knowing in those young eyes, made Rebecca pause. "Who are you?" Rebecca asked, her voice weak and raspy. "How did you get in here?" Emma did not answer the question. Instead, she walked to the chair beside Rebecca's bed, sat down, and placed her small hand on the dying woman's arm. "We're going to help you," Emma said softly. "But you have to do something first." Rebecca almost laughed. Almost. But the cancer had stolen even that from her. "What could I possibly do?" she whispered. "I'm dying." Emma's answer was simple and devastating. "You have to forgive your brother." The words hit Rebecca like a physical blow. Her face hardened. Her jaw clenched. Every muscle in her wasted body tensed with sudden fury. "Get out," she hissed. But Emma did not move. Sargent did not move. They sat there, perfectly still, perfectly calm, as if they had all the time in the world. "The anger is making you sick," Emma continued, her voice gentle but firm. "It's blocking the healing. It's like a wall inside you that nothing good can get through. You have to let it go." Rebecca's hands trembled with rage. "You're 7 years old. What could you possibly know about anger? What could you possibly know about watching your best friend die while your brother walks away without a scratch? What could you possibly know about anything?" Emma was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her words carried weight far beyond her years. "I know what it feels like when everyone thinks your daddy is a bad man. I know what it feels like to hear people whisper and point and laugh at your family. I know what it feels like to cry every single night into your pillow so your mommy doesn't hear. I know what it feels like to miss someone so much that your whole body hurts." She looked up at Rebecca with those ancient, knowing eyes. "I know about pain, Miss Rebecca. And I know it doesn't go away until you let it out." For the first time in 3 years, Rebecca Crawford felt something crack inside her chest. Not her body breaking down further. Something else. Something that had been frozen solid since the day of the accident. But she was not ready. Not yet. "Leave me alone," she said, turning her face away. "I don't want your help. I don't want anyone's help. I just want to die in peace." Emma nodded slowly, as if she had expected this response. "Okay," she said simply. "We'll come back tomorrow." And she did. Emma and Sargent returned the next day, and the day after that. Each time, Emma sat beside Rebecca's bed. Each time, Sargent lay across her feet, his warmth spreading through her cold body. Each time, Emma talked to her, not about forgiveness, not about healing, but about simple things. Her favorite foods. Her favorite memories. The sunflowers her mother planted in their backyard every spring. On the third day, something broke inside Rebecca Crawford. It happened without warning. One moment she was listening to Emma describe the way morning light came through her bedroom window, and the next moment she was sobbing. Deep, racking sobs that shook her entire body. 3 years of grief came pouring out of her like water from a broken dam. 3 years of rage. 3 years of guilt she had never admitted to anyone. Guilt over the terrible things she had said to her brother. Guilt over the years of silence that could never be taken back. "I forgive him," she gasped between sobs. "I forgive my brother. I forgive William. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." The moment the words left her lips, something happened. Warmth spread through Rebecca's body, starting at her chest where Emma's hand rested, flowing outward to her limbs, to her bones, to every dark corner where cancer had taken root. It was unlike anything she had ever experienced. It felt like sunlight after years of darkness. It felt like coming home after being lost for a lifetime. Emma held her hand. Sargent pressed closer. And something impossible began. The next morning, Rebecca's doctor ordered routine scans. Standard procedure for hospice patients, just to monitor the progression of the disease. The radiologist loaded the images on her screen, expecting to see the familiar landscape of tumors and shadows. Instead, she dropped her tablet. She ran the scans again. Then again. Then a fourth time. Every tumor was gone. Every single one. The cancer that had spread to her lungs, her lymph nodes, her bones, had completely vanished. Her blood work came back clean. Her organs were functioning normally. By every medical measure available, Rebecca Crawford was healthy. Spontaneous remission, the doctors called it. Miracle, Rebecca called it. Love, Emma called it. Now, standing in that Austin courtroom 6 months later, Rebecca Crawford was living proof that the impossible was possible. She was living proof that a 7-year-old girl and her German shepherd could do what the finest medical minds in the country could not. And she was about to help that same little girl save her father. William, Rebecca said, stepping forward, her eyes locked on her brother. I know we haven't spoken in 3 years. I know I said terrible things after the accident. I blamed you for surviving. I blamed you for Margaret's death. I was wrong. I was so wrong. Tears streamed down the judge's face. His hands gripped the arms of his wheelchair so tightly his knuckles turned white. Rebecca, he whispered. How is this possible? Emma, Rebecca said simply. Emma and Sergeant. They saved me. And they can save you too. But first, you need to read that letter. You need to know the truth about what happened the night Margaret died. Judge Crawford looked down at the folded paper in his hands. The letter Emma had pulled from her pocket. The letter Sergeant had found hidden behind a wall in Harrison Vance's office. His hands trembled as he unfolded it. The courtroom held its breath. And as Judge William Crawford began to read, his face went through a transformation that everyone present would remember for the rest of their lives. Confusion gave way to disbelief. Disbelief gave way to horror. Horror gave way to a rage so pure, so absolute, that the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. The letter was written in Harrison Vance's own handwriting. It was dated 2 weeks before Michael Sullivan's arrest. And it detailed everything. It detailed how Vance had grown jealous of Michael Sullivan's success. It detailed how Vance had paid a former patient to make false accusations. It detailed how Vance had planted the evidence that would send an innocent man to prison. But that was not the worst part. The worst part was the confession buried in the middle of the letter. The confession that Harrison Vance had apparently written during a moment of drunken guilt, then hidden away, too cowardly to destroy it. 3 years ago, on a rainy night in Austin, Harrison Vance had been drinking at a charity gala. He had gotten behind the wheel anyway. He had run a red light on a dangerous curve outside the city. He had struck a car carrying Judge William Crawford and his wife Margaret. Margaret died on impact. William's spine was shattered. And Harrison Vance fled the scene, leaving behind the destruction he had caused, disappearing into the night like the coward he was. But that was not all. Michael Sullivan had started asking questions. Michael had been consulting with Judge Crawford about experimental rehabilitation therapy. During their sessions, Crawford had mentioned details about the accident that did not add up. Michael had started investigating. He was getting close to the truth. Too close. Harrison Vance had framed Michael Sullivan to protect himself. He had destroyed an innocent man's life to hide the fact that he was a killer. Judge Crawford finished reading the letter. The courtroom was absolutely silent. When the judge looked up, his eyes found Emma Sullivan standing before him with her German shepherd, waiting patiently, calmly, as if she had known all along how this moment would unfold. This man, Crawford said, his voice shaking with barely controlled fury. This man killed my wife. This man put me in this wheelchair. This man framed your father. And for 3 years, he walked free while we suffered. Emma nodded slowly. Yes, sir. But it's not too late. It's not too late for justice. And it's not too late for you to walk again. The judge stared at her for a long moment. This impossible child. This 7-year-old girl who had uncovered what police detectives and FBI agents had failed to find for 3 years. This little girl who had healed his dying sister. This little girl who was now offering him something he had given up hope of ever having again. Bailiff, Judge Crawford said, his voice ringing through the silent courtroom. Contact the FBI immediately. Issue an arrest warrant for Dr. Harrison Vance. And dismiss all charges against Michael Sullivan. Emma's mother screamed with joy in the gallery. Michael Sullivan wept as guards removed his handcuffs. But Emma was not celebrating. Not yet. Because she knew this was only the beginning. She knew Harrison Vance was still out there. She knew he would not go down without a fight. And as if the universe was confirming her fears, the courtroom doors suddenly burst open and a breathless deputy rushed inside. Your Honor, he gasped. We just received word. Harrison Vance was seen leaving Austin Memorial Hospital 20 minutes ago. He's heading for a private airfield south of the city. He has a plane fueled and waiting. The judge's face went pale. He's running, Crawford whispered. The monster who killed my wife is trying to escape. Emma looked at Sargent. Sargent looked at Emma. And in that silent exchange, a decision was made. They had found the truth. They had freed her father. But their work was not done. Harrison Vance could not be allowed to escape. Justice had to be served. But could they stop a powerful man with resources and connections and a head start? Could a 7-year-old girl and her German shepherd do the impossible one more time? The answer was coming. And it would test everything Emma believed about courage, about justice, and about how far she was willing to go to protect the people she loved. Everyone froze when the news crackled through the deputy's radio, filling the courtroom with the sound of sirens and urgent voices. Harrison Vance had been spotted speeding toward a private airfield south of Austin. He had a chartered plane waiting. He had a passport under a false name. He had $50,000 in cash and a one-way ticket to a country with no extradition treaty. The monster who had killed Judge Crawford's wife, the man who had paralyzed him, the man who had framed Michael Sullivan and destroyed an innocent family, was about to vanish forever. No one expected what happened next. No one expected the 7-year-old girl standing before the judge's bench to reach into her pocket and pull out a second piece of paper, a paper that would change everything. "Wait," Emma said, her small voice cutting through the chaos. "There's something else. Something Sargent found that night in Dr. Vance's office." She held up the paper, and every eye in the courtroom turned toward her. "I know where he's really going. And I know how to stop him." The room erupted into shouting and confusion, but Judge Crawford raised his hand, demanding silence. His eyes locked onto Emma's with an intensity that made grown men uncomfortable. "What do you mean, child? What else did you find?" Emma walked forward and handed the paper to the bailiff, who passed it up to the judge. It was a printed email, folded and wrinkled, but the words were clear enough to read. "Dr. Vance has been planning this escape for months," Emma explained, her voice steady despite the weight of every adult gaze pressing down on her. "He knew someone might figure out the truth eventually. He had a backup plan. A boat waiting at the Galveston Marina. If the plane doesn't work, he's going to drive to the coast and disappear across the Gulf of Mexico." Judge Crawford scanned the email, his face growing darker with every word. "This is dated 3 weeks ago," he said. "He's been planning to run since before the trial even started." Emma nodded. "He never thought my daddy would get a fair trial. He thought he had one already. But Sargent found his hiding spot. Sargent found everything." The German shepherd sat perfectly still beside Emma, his intelligent brown eyes watching the judge as if he understood every word being spoken. And perhaps he did. Perhaps the bond between Emma and Sargent went deeper than anyone could comprehend. Judge Crawford grabbed the phone on his bench and began barking orders. FBI agents were dispatched to the private airfield. Coast Guard vessels were alerted to intercept any boats leaving the Galveston Marina. State troopers set up roadblocks on every highway leading south from Austin. The net was closing around Harrison Vance. But the monster had a 30-minute head start, and in 30 minutes, a desperate man could do desperate things. Michael Sullivan, finally free from his handcuffs, rushed to his daughter and pulled her into his arms. Tears streamed down his face as he held her, this brave little girl who had moved heaven and earth to bring him home. "You did it, sweetheart," he whispered into her hair. "You saved me. You saved our whole family." Emma hugged her father tight, but her eyes remained fixed on the courtroom doors. Something was bothering her. Something she could not quite name. Sargent felt it too. His ears were perked forward, his body tense, his nose twitching as if he was tracking a scent that no one else could detect. "Daddy," Emma said quietly, "it's not over yet. I can feel it. Something bad is still coming." Before Michael could respond, the courtroom doors burst open again. A federal agent rushed inside, his face pale and grim. "Your Honor, we have a situation. Vance never went to the airfield. It was a decoy. One of his employees was driving his car as a distraction while Vance headed in the opposite direction." The judge slammed his fist on the bench. "Where is he now?" "We don't know, sir. We lost him. He could be anywhere in the city by now." A cold silence fell over the courtroom. The celebration that had been building moments ago evaporated like morning mist. Harrison Vance was still out there. He was still free. And a man who had already killed once would not hesitate to kill again if it meant protecting himself. Emma closed her eyes and placed her hand on Sargent's head. She did not know how her gift worked. She did not understand the connection she shared with her dog. But she knew that when they worked together, they could find things that others could not. They could sense things that logic could not explain. She thought about Harrison Vance. She thought about his fear, his desperation, his overwhelming need to escape. She thought about the darkness inside him, the same darkness that had allowed him to flee the scene of an accident while a woman lay dying in a crushed car. And then she felt it. A pull. A direction. A whisper in her mind that sounded almost like Sargent's voice. Her eyes snapped open. "The hospital," she said. He went back to the hospital. Everyone stared at her. "That's impossible," the FBI agent said. "We have agents at Austin Memorial right now." They searched his office. "He's not there." Emma shook her head. "Not his office. The basement. There's a room in the basement where they keep old records. He has a safe there. He needs something from that safe before he can disappear. Something important. Something he can't leave behind." The agent looked skeptical, but Judge Crawford was not. "You found a letter that 3 years of federal investigation missed," the judge said slowly. "You found an email that predicted his escape route before anyone knew he was running. If this child says he's at the hospital, then he's at the hospital." He turned to the agent. "Send every available unit to Austin Memorial. Search the basement. Find Harrison Vance." The agent nodded and rushed out of the courtroom, already barking orders into his radio. 23 minutes later, the call came through. Harrison Vance had been found in a storage room in the basement of Austin Memorial Hospital, exactly where Emma said he would be. He was clutching a metal lockbox containing hundreds of thousands of dollars in bearer bonds, multiple fake passports, and a handwritten list of contacts in 3 different countries who could help him disappear. He had put up a fight. He had injured 2 federal agents before being subdued. But when the handcuffs finally clicked around his wrists, when he was finally dragged out of that basement and into the blinding light of a dozen news cameras, the look on his face was one of absolute disbelief. He had been caught by a 7-year-old girl and her dog. He had been destroyed by the very family he had tried to break. As agents loaded Vance into an armored vehicle, reporters swarmed the courthouse steps demanding statements. The story was already spreading across social media like wildfire. A little girl and her German shepherd had exposed a killer, freed an innocent man, and helped capture a fugitive that the entire FBI had lost track of. It was the kind of story that people would talk about for years. But inside the courtroom, away from the cameras and the chaos, a much quieter moment was unfolding. Judge William Crawford had asked everyone to leave. Everyone except Emma, Sargent, Michael, and Rebecca. The 4 of them stood in the empty courtroom, the afternoon light streaming through the tall windows, dust motes floating in the golden air like tiny stars. "You promised me something," the judge said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Back at the beginning of all this. You said if I freed your father, you would heal me. You would make me walk again." Emma nodded slowly. "I remember." "Did you mean it? Can you really do what you claim?" Emma looked at Sargent. The German shepherd looked back at her. Something passed between them, some silent communication that no one else could understand. "I don't know," Emma said honestly. "I've never tried to heal someone who's been hurt as long as you have. I've never tried to fix something that doctors say can't be fixed." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "But I know that what happened to my daddy's patients was real. I know what happened to your sister was real. And I know that Sargent and I have something special. Something that works when we work together. Something that loves people back to health." Judge Crawford's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I've spent 3 years in this chair. 3 years being told I would never stand again. 3 years watching the world from a sitting position while everyone else moved on with their lives." His voice cracked. "I would give anything to walk again. Anything." Emma stepped closer to his wheelchair, Sargent moving in perfect sync beside her. "There's one thing you need to do first," she said softly. "The same thing I asked your sister to do before I could help her." "What is it?" "You have to forgive yourself." The judge's face crumpled. "Forgive myself? For what?" For surviving, Emma said gently. For living when your wife died. For blaming yourself every single day for something that was never your fault. Rebecca stepped forward, placing her hand on her brother's shoulder. She's right, William. I felt the same thing when I was dying. All that anger, all that guilt, it was like poison inside me. It was blocking everything good from getting through. I had to let it go before Emma could help me. Judge Crawford bowed his head. His shoulders began to shake. And for the first time in 3 years, in front of witnesses, in front of the sister he had thought he lost forever, Judge William Crawford allowed himself to cry. He cried for his wife Margaret. He cried for the life they would never have together. He cried for the 3 years he had spent punishing himself for the crime of staying alive. And when the tears finally stopped, when he raised his head and looked at Emma with red-rimmed eyes, something had changed in his face. The hardness was gone. The bitterness was gone. In its place was something that looked almost like hope. I'm ready, he whispered. I'm ready to try. Emma nodded and placed both of her small hands on the judge's paralyzed legs. Sergeant rose and pressed his nose against Crawford's spine. The golden afternoon light seemed to brighten around them, wrapping them in warmth that had nothing to do with the sun. And then Emma closed her eyes. What happened next would be debated by doctors and scientists for decades. It would be studied and analyzed and argued over in medical journals and television programs and countless internet forums. But for the 4 people in that empty courtroom, there was no debate. There was only a warmth that spread through Judge Crawford's body like sunrise breaking over the horizon. There was only a tingling in legs that had felt nothing for 3 years. There was only the impossible sensation of muscles awakening from a long, long sleep. And there was only Emma Sullivan, her face pale with effort, her small body trembling with the exertion of channeling something far bigger than herself. But something was wrong. Emma's nose began to bleed. A single red line dripping down to her lip. Sergeant whined softly, pressing closer to her. And somewhere outside the courtroom windows, watching from the shadows of a parked car across the street, a woman with silver hair observed everything with knowing eyes. She had been waiting for this moment. She had been waiting for Emma Sullivan for a very, very long time. And what she knew about the little girl's gift, what she knew about its origins and its cost and its terrible price, would change everything Emma thought she understood about herself. The question was whether Emma would survive long enough to learn the truth. Everyone froze when Emma Sullivan collapsed to the floor of the courtroom, her small body crumpling like a paper doll that had been held up by invisible strings. Sergeant was at her side instantly, whining and licking her pale face, his powerful body positioned protectively over the little girl who had pushed herself beyond all human limits. Blood continued to trickle from her nose, staining her pink dress with crimson droplets that spread like tiny flowers across the fabric. No one expected what happened next. No one expected Judge William Crawford to grip the arms of his wheelchair and push himself upward with a strength he had not possessed in 3 years. No one expected the paralyzed man to rise on trembling legs that should not have been able to hold him. No one expected him to take one step, then another, crossing the distance between his bench and the fallen child who had given him back the impossible gift of walking. "Someone call an ambulance," the judge shouted, his voice cracking with emotion and fear. "Someone help this child." Michael Sullivan was already on the floor beside his daughter, cradling her head in his lap, calling her name over and over. Rebecca Crawford stood frozen in shock, her hand pressed against her mouth, tears streaming down her face as she watched her brother walk for the first time since the accident that had stolen everything from him. The courtroom that had been empty moments ago suddenly filled with noise and chaos. Deputies rushed in. Paramedics were called. Someone was screaming for a doctor. But through it all, Emma remained unconscious, her breathing shallow, her face as white as fresh snow. Sergeant refused to leave her side. When a paramedic tried to move him away, the German shepherd growled with a ferocity that made the man stumble backward. Michael placed his hand on Sergeant's head. "Easy, boy. They're trying to help her. They're trying to help our girl." Sergeant's growl faded to a whimper, but he remained pressed against Emma, his body warmth flowing into her cold skin, his breath hot against her cheek. The paramedics worked quickly, checking her vitals, hooking up monitors, speaking in rapid medical terminology that meant nothing to the terrified father watching his daughter fight for her life. They loaded her onto a stretcher, and Michael climbed into the ambulance beside her, refusing to let go of her hand. As the ambulance doors closed, as the sirens began to wail and the vehicle pulled away from the courthouse, No one noticed the black sedan that followed at a careful distance. No one noticed the woman with silver hair behind the wheel, her expression unreadable, her eyes fixed on the flashing lights ahead. She had waited 20 years for this moment. She could wait a little longer. At Dell Children's Medical Center, doctors rushed Emma into the emergency room while Michael paced the waiting area like a caged animal. His wife Sarah arrived within minutes, her face streaked with tears, her hands trembling as she clutched her husband. What happened? What's wrong with her? Is she going to be okay? Michael shook his head helplessly. I don't know. She was healing the judge. She had her hands on his legs, and then she just collapsed. There was blood coming from her nose. She wouldn't wake up. Sarah let out a sob that echoed through the sterile hallway. I knew this would happen. I knew her gift would take too much from her one day. I knew it was dangerous. You knew. Michael pulled back, staring at his wife. What do you mean you knew? Before Sarah could answer, a doctor emerged from the emergency room. Her expression was puzzled, confused in a way that doctors rarely allow themselves to appear. Mr. and Mrs. Sullivan? I'm Dr. Patricia Hernandez. I've been examining your daughter. Is she okay? Sarah's voice was desperate. Please tell me she's okay. Dr. Hernandez hesitated. She's stable. She's regained consciousness, and she's asking for someone named Sergeant. I assume that's the dog that security is currently trying to keep out of my emergency room. Michael almost laughed with relief. Yes. Sergeant is her German Shepherd. They have a special bond. Can he see her? The doctor raised an eyebrow. This is highly irregular, but given the circumstances, I'll allow it. However, I need to speak with you about something first. Something I've never encountered in my 20 years of practicing medicine. She led them to a small consultation room and closed the door behind them. Your daughter's blood work came back with some unusual results. Her brain scans show activity patterns I've never seen before. When she was healing the judge, whatever she did, it seems to have drained her body's energy reserves in a way that should not be physically possible. It's as if she literally gave away part of her own life force. Sarah's face went pale. There's more, Dr. Hernandez continued. While Emma was unconscious, she kept repeating a name. Over and over again. The name Grace. Sarah gasped. Her hand flew to her heart. Michael looked at his wife with growing confusion. Who is Grace? He asked. Emma has never mentioned anyone named Grace. Sarah's eyes filled with fresh tears. She opened her mouth to speak, but before she could say a word, a knock came at the door. A nurse poked her head in. I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's a woman here claiming she has urgent information about your daughter. She says her name is Dr. Eleanor Hayes, and she says she knew Emma's grandmother. Michael and Sarah exchanged stunned looks. Emma's grandmother died before Emma was born, Michael said slowly. Before Sarah and I even met. How could this woman possibly know anything about her? Sarah was trembling now, her whole body shaking as if she was standing in a freezing wind. Let her in, Sarah whispered. We need to hear what she has to say. The nurse nodded and disappeared. A moment later, the door opened again, and a woman with silver hair and sharp, knowing eyes stepped into the room. She was elegant, composed, radiating an authority that filled the small space like perfume. Mr. and Mrs. Sullivan, she said, her voice calm and measured. My name is Dr. Eleanor Hayes. I was a researcher at MIT for 30 years, studying something that most scientists dismissed as fantasy. The connection between human consciousness and healing. The power of love to create measurable biological changes in the human body. She paused, her eyes meeting Sarah's. And I was your mother's closest friend. I was there the night she died. The night she was murdered for possessing the same gift that your daughter has now manifested. The room went absolutely silent. Michael felt as if the floor had dropped out from beneath his feet. Murdered, he repeated. Sarah, you told me your mother died of an illness when you were 3 years old. You said you barely remembered her. Sarah was crying openly now, her shoulders shaking with sobs she had held back for 30 years. I lied, she whispered. I lied because I was scared. Because I didn't want what happened to my mother to happen to my daughter. Because I thought if I never talked about it, if I pretended the gift didn't exist, maybe it would skip a generation. Maybe Emma would be normal. Maybe she would be safe. Dr. Hayes stepped closer, her expression softening with compassion. The gift doesn't skip generations, Sarah. It sleeps sometimes. It hides. But it always wakes up eventually. Your mother Grace was the most powerful healer I ever encountered. She could cure diseases that medicine couldn't touch. She could mend bones and restore sight and give hope to the hopeless. Her voice dropped. But there are people in this world who see such gifts not as blessings but as weapons. People who want to control that power, harness it, use it for their own purposes. They found your mother. They tried to take her. When she refused to cooperate, they killed her. Michael's blood ran cold. Who are these people? Who killed Sarah's mother? Dr. Hayes met his eyes with a gaze that held decades of pain and secrets. They call themselves the Collectors. They have existed for centuries, moving through the shadows of history, gathering individuals with extraordinary abilities. They have connections in governments, in corporations, in organizations you would never suspect. And they have been watching your daughter since the day she healed that old Labrador named Biscuit 3 years ago. Sarah let out a cry of anguish. They've been watching Emma? For 3 years? And they're the ones who killed my mother. Yes, Dr. Hayes said simply. And now that Emma has revealed herself so publicly, now that the entire world knows what she can do, the Collectors will come for her. They will stop at nothing to possess her gift. They will threaten, manipulate, and if necessary, kill anyone who stands in their way. Michael stood up, his hands clenched into fists. Then we run. We take Emma and disappear. We go somewhere they can never find us. Dr. Hayes shook her head slowly. You cannot run from the Collectors, Mr. Sullivan. They have eyes everywhere. They have resources beyond your imagination. The only way to protect Emma is to teach her to control her gift, to strengthen it, to turn it into something they cannot take without her consent. She reached into her bag and pulled out a brochure. There is a school in Vermont. The Hayes Institute for Exceptional Children. I founded it 30 years ago as a sanctuary for children like Emma. Children with gifts that the world doesn't understand. There she would be safe. There she would learn. There she would find others like herself. Before Michael could respond, the door burst open and a nurse rushed in. Mr. and Mrs. Sullivan, you need to come quickly. Something is happening with your daughter. Her monitors are going crazy, and she's asking for you. She says she had a dream. She says her grandmother spoke to her. The 3 adults rushed down the hallway to Emma's room. Michael's heart pounded with every step. Sarah clutched his arm so tightly her nails left marks in his skin. When they reached Emma's room, they found her sitting up in bed, Sergeant curled beside her, her face still pale but her eyes burning with an intensity that made her look far older than 7 years. Mommy, Emma said, her voice strange and distant. Daddy. I saw Grandma Grace. She told me things. Important things. She turned to Dr. Hayes, who had followed them into the room. She told me you would come. She told me about the Collectors. She told me what I have to do to stop them from hurting anyone else ever again. Her small hands clenched the hospital blankets. She told me that Harrison Vance wasn't working alone. She told me that someone powerful ordered him to destroy our family. Someone who has been hunting healers for decades. Someone who killed her 20 years ago. Emma's eyes met her mother's. She told me his name. The man who murdered your mother. The man who is coming for me next. Sarah could barely breathe. Who, sweetheart? Who is he? Emma's answer was barely a whisper, but it echoed through the hospital room like thunder. She said his name is Marcus Webb. And she said he's already here. In Austin. Watching. Waiting. She looked toward the window, where the afternoon light was fading into evening shadows. He knows what I can do now. He knows I'm strong. And he's coming for me tonight. Sergeant rose to his feet, his hackles raised, a low growl rumbling in his throat. Somewhere in the hospital, the lights flickered. And in the parking lot below, a black limousine pulled into a space reserved for doctors, its tinted windows hiding whoever sat inside. The final battle was about to begin. But was Emma strong enough to face the monster who had destroyed her family once before? And what terrible price would she have to pay to stop him? Everyone froze when the hospital lights went completely dark, plunging Dell Children's Medical Center into absolute blackness. Emergency generators kicked in 3 seconds later, bathing the hallways in dim red light that made everything look like a scene from a nightmare. Sargent's growl deepened into something primal and dangerous, his body positioning itself between Emma's hospital bed and the door. And in that terrible silence, footsteps echoed down the corridor, slow and deliberate, each one bringing the monster closer to the child he had been hunting for 3 years. No one expected what happened next. No one expected 7-year-old Emma Sullivan to push off her hospital blankets, swing her legs over the side of the bed, and stand on shaking legs that should not have been able to hold her. No one expected her to place her hand on Sargent's head and speak words that carried the weight of generations. "He's here," she said quietly. "And I'm not going to run anymore." Michael grabbed his daughter's shoulders. "Emma, no. You're too weak. Whatever you did to heal Judge Crawford, it nearly killed you. You can't face this man. Let me protect you. Let me handle this." Emma looked up at her father with eyes that held wisdom far beyond her years. Eyes that had seen her grandmother in a dream. Eyes that understood things that no child should ever have to understand. "Daddy, you can't protect me from this. Not with your fists. Not with your anger. The only thing that can stop Marcus Webb is the same thing that healed Judge Crawford. The same thing that saved Aunt Rebecca. The same thing that brought you home from that courtroom." She touched his face gently. "Love, Daddy. Love is the only weapon that works against darkness this deep." Before Michael could respond, the door to Emma's room swung open. A man stood in the doorway. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than most people's cars. His hair was silver at the temples, his face handsome in a cold, calculated way. But his eyes were what made Sarah gasp and stumble backward. His eyes were empty. Hollow. Like windows into a house where no one had lived for a very long time. "Emma Sullivan," he said, his voice smooth as silk and twice as dangerous. "You look just like your grandmother. She had that same stubborn fire in her eyes. Right up until the moment she died." Dr. Eleanor Hayes stepped forward, positioning herself between Marcus Webb and the child. "Marcus, it's been 20 years. I had hoped you would have found some humanity in all that time. I see I was wrong." Webb smiled, but the expression never reached those empty eyes. "Eleanor. Still playing protector to freaks and anomalies. Still pretending that these gifts are blessings instead of resources to be harvested. You haven't changed at all. Neither have you. Still a monster. Still a murderer. Still everything that Grace saw through the moment she met you." Webb's smile faded. "Grace could have been magnificent. She could have changed the world at my side. Instead, she chose to waste her gift on strangers, on nobodies, on people who didn't matter. She could have lived forever as a queen. Instead, she died a martyr." He turned his gaze to Emma. "You have a choice, child. The same choice I offered your grandmother. Come with me willingly, and your family lives. Refuse and I will take you anyway, but I will leave nothing behind but ashes." Sargent's growl exploded into a bark that echoed off the hospital walls. The German shepherd lunged forward, teeth bared, every muscle coiled for attack. But Webb simply raised his hand, and 2 massive guards appeared in the doorway, weapons drawn, ready to cut down anyone who moved. "I would keep that animal under control," Webb said calmly. "My men are not known for their patience." Emma stepped forward, past Dr. Hayes, past her parents who reached for her desperately, past Sargent who whined in confusion. She walked until she was standing directly in front of Marcus Webb, this monster who had haunted her family for 2 decades. "You're sick," she said softly. "Not in your body. In your heart. Something happened to you a long time ago. Something that made you forget how to feel. Something that made you afraid of love, because love means letting people hurt you." Webb's composure flickered. Just for a moment. Just enough for Emma to see. "I am not sick, child. I am evolved. I have transcended the weakness of human emotion. I have become something greater than." "You're lonely," Emma interrupted. "You're so lonely that it feels like a hole inside you that nothing can fill. You've spent your whole life trying to collect power because you think power will make the loneliness go away. But it never does. It just makes the hole bigger." Webb's face contorted with sudden rage. "Enough. You know nothing about me. You are a child. A resource. A tool to be used. Nothing more. He reached for her arm. And that was when Emma did something that no one in that room would ever forget. She reached up and placed her small hand over Marcus Webb's heart. Sargent pressed against her side. And together, they opened a channel that had been closed for 50 years. Webb gasped. His body went rigid. His eyes, those empty, hollow eyes, suddenly filled with something they had not held since he was a child himself. Tears. Real tears, streaming down his face as Emma poured light into the darkness that had consumed him. She showed him memories he had buried so deep he had forgotten they existed. A mother who loved him before she died too young. A father who beat him until he learned to stop feeling. A childhood of pain that he had survived by becoming the very monster who had hurt him. She showed him every person he had harmed. Every life he had destroyed. Every healer he had killed or captured or broken. She made him feel their pain, their fear, their desperate hope that someone would save them. And she showed him something else. Something he had never believed was possible. Forgiveness. "I forgive you," Emma whispered, her voice strained with effort, her nose beginning to bleed again. "For what you did to my grandmother. For what you tried to do to my family. For all the hurt you've caused because you were hurting so badly yourself. I forgive you." Webb fell to his knees. The guards behind him watched in stunned confusion, their weapons lowering as their unshakable leader crumbled before a 7-year-old girl. "How?" Webb gasped. "How can you forgive me? After everything I've done?" "Because holding on to anger would only hurt me," Emma said simply. "And because my grandmother asked me to. She said that's what she should have done when she was alive. She said the only way to break the cycle is to choose love, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." Webb's body shook with sobs. 50 years of frozen emotion thawed in a matter of moments, flooding through him like a river breaking through a dam. His guards looked at each other, then at Dr. Hayes, then slowly lowered their weapons completely. "It's over, Marcus," Eleanor said softly, stepping forward. "The collectors are finished. Your organization will crumble without you. Let it go. Let it all go." Webb looked up at Emma through tear-blurred eyes. "What happens to me now?" Emma smiled gently. "That's up to you. You can spend the rest of your life trying to undo some of the damage you've done. Or you can keep running from the pain. But I think you're tired of running. I think you've been tired for a very long time." Marcus Webb, the man who had terrorized healers for decades, the man who had killed Emma's grandmother, the man who had come to claim a child and instead lost himself, bowed his head. "I surrender," he whispered. "I surrender everything." 3 hours later, the Austin Police Department took Marcus Webb into custody. He confessed to everything. Every crime. Every murder. Every dark deed that the collectors had committed under his leadership. The organization that had haunted extraordinary children for generations was finally, completely, utterly destroyed. 2 weeks later, Judge William Crawford walked his sister Rebecca down the aisle at her wedding, the wedding she never thought she would live to see. He stood tall and strong, tears of joy streaming down his face as he gave her away to the man she loved. Michael Sullivan returned to his clinic, where patients lined up around the block, desperate to be treated by the man who had been proven innocent and whose daughter had become a national symbol of hope. And Emma Sullivan, the 7-year-old girl who had done the impossible over and over again, stood on the porch of her Cedar Park home with Sargent beside her, watching the sunset paint the Texas sky in shades of gold and pink and purple. Her mother sat beside her, finally free from the secrets she had carried for 30 years. "Are you going to go?" Sarah asked quietly. "To the school in Vermont? To learn more about your gift?" Emma was quiet for a long moment. "Someday," she said finally. "But not yet. Right now, I just want to be a kid. I want to play with Sargent and go to school and eat ice cream and do all the normal things that normal 7-year-olds do." She smiled up at her mother. "The world will need me again eventually. I know that. But for now, I think I've done enough saving. Now it's time for the world to save itself for a little while." Sargent barked in agreement, his tail wagging happily. And as the sun sank below the horizon and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Emma Sullivan closed her eyes and felt something she had not felt in a very long time. Peace. True, complete, absolute peace. Her grandmother was at rest. Her family was safe. The monsters were defeated. And tomorrow was a brand new day full of infinite possibilities. Some people say miracles don't exist. Some people say that love is just a chemical reaction in the brain, that healing is just medicine, that there's a scientific explanation for everything if you look hard enough. But the people of Austin, Texas knew better. They had seen a paralyzed judge walk. They had watched a dying woman live. They had witnessed a killer brought to justice by a child and her dog. They knew that sometimes, in the darkest moments, when all hope seems lost and every door seems closed, a miracle walks in on 4 legs and speaks through the voice of a 7-year-old girl. And they knew that love, real love, unconditional love, is the most powerful force in the universe. All you have to do is believe. If this story touched your heart, if Emma and Sergeant's journey moved you to tears or gave you hope, I need you to do something right now. Hit that subscribe button and tap the notification bell so you never miss another story like this one. Drop a comment below and tell me what moment affected you the most. Was it when Emma forgave the man who killed her grandmother? Was it when the judge took his first steps? Was it when Rebecca revealed her miraculous healing? Share your thoughts because I read every single comment and your words mean the world to me. Smash that like button to help this story reach more people who need to hear it. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that miracles are real and that love can conquer even the deepest darkness. Thank you for being here. Thank you for watching until the very end. And remember, no matter what you're facing today, no matter how impossible your situation seems, there is always hope. There is always love. And sometimes, the miracle you've been waiting for is closer than you think.